Hi, it's Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is Listening Beyond the Soundbites. Ben Kinsley is joining us tonight as host and co-producer. Ben, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. And our special guest tonight is Rob LeClaire, who's a House of Representatives for Barre Town. Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pat. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
As we told you last week, we're going to do a series of shows on Act 46. And if you haven't figured it out by now, you really should find out what's happening in your schools and listen to these videos, and maybe you'll learn something and get as yanked up as I am. So that before the show, I'm blabbing on and on. And another thing. But anyway, I have to tell you, first, congratulations on being reelected.
Thank you.
And you were also the whip. I love that title, the whip.
The whip.
The whip.
I call it the assistant minority leader.
Yes, right. I know every time. Who was the former assistant minority leader?
Brian Savage.
Yeah, Brian. He always would correct me too, but anyway, I think the whip's cool.
Semantics.
Yeah, semantics is great. So I really want to thank you, and I know you're very involved in Act 46. But before we get started, could you talk a little bit about yourself and
Sure.
and why you want to do this?
Well, like so many people, my public service has gone way back. It started, quite honestly, as a volunteer fireman in Middlesex. I had joined because I wanted to drive a fire truck and squirt water.
And there you go.
And so I did that for probably, I don't know, close to 10 years, and I wound up being a captain and president of the fire department, which
Wow.
basically was running the business side of things. And then an opportunity presented itself where I was asked if I would consider running for the U32 school board.
Oh, bless you.
And it was against an incumbent who was the chair of the school board, and I said, well, geez, let me think about it a little bit. Well, I did, and I won that, and I was there for, I think, about 9 years and was on the executive committee. And you just sort of, rolling one thing to the other, and then I left Middlesex and moved into Barre Town, and I was approached about running for a select board, and I said, geez, that isn't really something I thought about, but let me think about it.
Yeah.
And again, I had to run against an incumbent, and I was successful and had the good luck to win. So I served on the Barre Town Select Board for 4 years, and then, well, actually I was on it for about 3 years, and I was approached about running for the House of Representatives. I said, geez, I haven't really thought about that, but let me think about it. And now I'm heading into my third term.
Good for you.
Yeah,
Excellent.
so-
What did I wrote a little article back to the Times Argus because they said because the Democrats won in Barre City. And they said that the Democrats came in, and it was a blue wave in Barre City or whatever they're calling it. But they said something they said the Republicans, I wish I could remember the word, it was, sort of took over in Barre Town again. I said they're always electing Republicans, and it was just the way they looked at the Democrats winning and the Republicans winning. I wrote a little letter. I said you should make it even. Call it red wave, something. But anyway.
Yeah, I think we've been
What can we
Republicans in Barre Town
For a long time.
since '84.
I think the word was holdout, I think is what they used.
Was it holdout?
Something like
It was
that.
something not equal.
I think they just have two very qualified candidates in Barre Town.
Yeah, there you go. I agree with that. And you've done great work in the legislature and always represent Barre Town, always. So, so the issue here today, and one of the reasons we wanted to start doing Act 46 was that there was an anticipation that Barre City and Barre Town would merge. You had a vote, and clearly everybody said no.
3 votes, I think, right?
We have, heading for a fourth.
Yeah, and you keep getting asked to re-vote, but if they're not going to listen to the voting, why do it? I mean, seriously, this drives me crazy. This is America. We vote, and then people listen to the vote. So
That's been one of the main questions about Act 46 for Barre Town and Barre City is, if you take a step back and look at it, for us, the Barre Town, Barre City schools were some of the lowest spending per pupil in the state. We've always had a right-sized district. We're closer to 2,500. A lot of the things that had been asked of other schools recently, we had done early on, whether it be, consolidate contracts, so you have a district-wide contract, to having a director of curriculum,
Right.
different things, looking for those efficiencies. And all the while, I don't think anybody would say that an education from any Barre area school was second to anyone.
No, for sure.
So there was always that feeling that we were so close to what they were looking for, but then part of the argument for some was, well, if you're that close, why not go the whole way? One of the things that's been frustrating is, and like some of us had spoken about it earlier, is if the Board of Education has always had this as the ultimate vision, why not articulate it
Right.
early on,
Right.
so that you don't have to go through 3 and maybe 4 votes to get to where they're saying that you need to be anyway.
Right.
So we'll see how this turns out. It's different this time in that the board has made it very clear they're going to force a merger.
So, but you have to vote again?
We do have to vote again. There was a petition within days of the last vote of November 6th that had enough to go back and ask for a revote. I think there was a little strategy behind that that I don't think has worked out, in that I think there was a feeling that if there was a pending revote, that the Board of Education might not have the authority to force the merger, that
Oh.
you could potentially run the clock out. That isn't quite
Well, they run out of steam, don't they? At the end of this month, they're no longer
as of the,
as a group, as a committee.
right, as of the end of last month. They're,
Oh, last month? Oh,
yep,
okay, I
November.
thought
In fact,
I thought-
wait a minute, sorry.
No,
You're
November
right.
3rd, you're right,
Yeah.
30th, you're right.
They have to issue their final report,
Right.
and that's sort of where they are.
And you told me that the legislature gave this committee the authority to override the votes, right?
Yeah,
Which, I
it's-
mean, who does that? It's the United States of America. We vote, you listen, and you do. Not now.
Yeah, I'm not sure that everyone was quite aware that that was what was in there, because it changed a couple times right at the end. Originally, the bill that went to the floor had a requirement that it actually come back to the legislature for a vote, and specifically for a constitutionality issue, because you have an unelected board
Right,
deciding these things that are overriding a popular vote.
right. I'm sure that might get mentioned in a lawsuit if there's
I'm sure there might be that might be mentioned a couple times in a
think so.
lawsuit.
Yes. Anyway,
Rob, could you talk a little bit about the structure of the Barre Supervisory Union, what it looks like, the different boards involved,
Sure.
Operating structures, that type of thing?
Currently, each elementary school, which we have 2, has its own board. And then you have Spalding High School, which has its own board, and there's a tech center that they have oversight over. And then you have a board that's comprised for the supervisory union, and that board is actually comprised of board members from the elementary school and Spalding. So you have, in essence, 4 boards and 4 to 5 budgets, although the tech center's budget kind of gets rolled up into,
Yes, you do, or not the high school.
well, to the high school.
Yeah.
and nothing in any of this Act 46 messes with the tech center or the high schools, right? I mean, the tech centers are not in this discussion. It's the elementary schools.
Well, I mean, they're all a part of it as far as the governance, in that
Oh.
what they're looking to have happen is you have one global board. So instead of having the 4 boards, they're looking to have one board.
Oh,
And then instead of having, say, 4 or 5 different little budgets, all gets
yeah, into
lumped
one.
into one.
Okay, so that's under, if when the merger does happen, if it happens, so there will just be one of everything.
Yes.
One supervisory, and I think a lot of the discussion was, how does the supervisory oversee all these different boards? Because somebody's got to go to the meetings, and
Right.
you've
Right.
got 4, 5, 6, 7 boards you've got to run around attending.
So, now you have other towns that are in pretty close proximity to Barrytown. Barre City, do they have their own high school in Barre City, or do they share a high school?
They share a high school with Barrytown, Barre City share a high school, Spalding.
Okay, so Spalding is the shared school.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's been that way for
Long time.
a long time,
Yeah.
a couple decades
Well,
anyway.
weren't you all, this is years ago, wasn't it Barre City and Barrytown all one? Many years ago, somebody told me, this is like way back when, that they were one, and then they split it up at some point in time.
I don't know the answer
No,
to
I
that
think
question,
that I
Pat.
think
Yeah,
that was way.
way back.
We say BP in my house before Pat.
So I'm going to throw a term out there that a lot of people who have followed the Act 46 process will be familiar with, but the preferred model, right? The preferred model is basically a bunch of similar operating schools, so like elementary schools that operate, 6 through 8 or 4 through 8 or whatever the grade levels are, and then a high school that's regional on top of that. So multiple elementary schools feeding into one high school. That sounds like it's pretty close to what you've got now.
You're exactly right. That's exactly what we are. So that's why we had felt all along that we wouldn't necessarily be forced, because you could make the argument that we were sort of the poster child, the preferred model for other schools.
And did you submit a report to them about, we'd like to keep it this way because we are reflective of what you have in mind?
They certainly did go try to make the case before the board that
Right.
we are cost per pupil, size,
Right.
we're meeting the majority, if not all, of the criteria, and that was part of the concern. Is the criteria in some cases was a little vague, as far as sizes and things like that. Outcomes, again, I don't know that anybody would dispute that the Barre school system has very good outcomes. So one of the criticisms has been that if the board has always had this as a preferred model, they should have articulated it early on so that you wouldn't have all the time and effort that's been put into this and still have it wind up not meeting their wishes. And that's where a lot of the frustration is.
So what was the reaction that you got? Like, what was the pushback that you got from the State Board of Ed when you basically came forward and said, this looks like the preferred model to us? We have good outcomes, our cost per pupil's low, we've done a lot of this administrative consolidation already, rolling up special education to the supervisory union level, all of this stuff.
Yep.
What was their reaction? What did they push back on?
Basically was that if you're this close,
Why not?
it's so easy, why don't you finish it? And that's where it winds up being a matter of opinion, is we'll finish it by your standards or ours.
And in merging with Barre City, is there debt that you would be acquiring? Because that's a complaint we're hearing it here in Berlin.
Yeah. Because this has been such a long process, that has become less of a problem. It's my understanding now that they're within like $67,000 of each other. So
Really?
it's
That's
pretty
great.
pretty close.
Yeah.
Very, very close.
Yeah. Have people articulated reasons why they are upset? Because in a show we had just recently to talk about this, there are issues of salaries could potentially go up, because if one entity is paying more than the other, you can't lower. You've got to raise raise the bar, and so then transportation. I mean, there's all kinds of things that could add to the cost.
Yeah. For some, those are absolutely valid questions. For us, quite honestly, because we have a supervisor union-wide contract, that's been addressed. Transportation, 2 or 3 years ago, Barre Town, we did keep our own bus fleet.
Yeah.
We maintained it and stuff. We've since outsourced that. So these are all things that we recognize that could be done, should be done, and didn't need Act 46 to have us do it.
Right.
So in essence, we somewhat became victims of our own success in that looking ahead and trying to do the right thing apparently just wasn't enough.
Well, every time Paul Malone would come before this group you and I are in, I mean, it's amazing when he would list Barre Town cost compared to the other school. You guys are always lower, always lower. And we thought in Berlin we were doing great, and then we'd see their numbers and nope.
Yeah.
Missed it, but but Berlin's still low, but not as low as Barre Town. Always, and the performance levels. It's really hard work goes into that over there, and it's working.
You know, there are some differences. I mean, you talk like about U32. U32's got a fairly high cost per pupil for a variety of reasons. But, you know, one of the things that does drive them compared to some others is like transportation.
Yeah, they're
Spalding
so
doesn't
spread
provide.
out.
Right.
Right. U32, back when I was on the board, had, I don't know, 16, 18, 19 buses. We don't have any at Spalding, you know, really. So, you know, there are some, but they have done a very, very good job of just watching the bottom line, but yet making sure that education outcomes don't suffer.
And what are the sticking points, particularly for voters that, you know, this merger has gone down 3 times with voters in Barre town. So what are the sticking points? What are people afraid of, or what are people disagree with from the State Board of Ed's perspective?
Well, initially there was the concerns about increased costs. You know, if one school's got a higher debt load than another, obviously, so they've worked towards that. Barrytown has made a substantial investment in the recreational complex up on the hill over the years. The town had put in a lot of money into that, but yet the school district actually owned the real estate. So they were able to go ahead and address that issue. The Articles of Agreement, they have been working on those over time and have refined them and defined them to the point where a lot of folks who were fairly critical now are more in support, in that initially you had just the one board that had a lot of authority, where the current Articles of Agreement, if this is to pass, some of the stuff, a lot of it has to go out to a town vote. If you ever wanted to close a school, it's got to be a town vote.
Right.
Different things like that. So it's helped some people, but there still are those that are saying, well, you know, why do we have to merge? You take a look at the cost, depending on, you know, what numbers you're looking at, or I guess what areas you're looking, you know, I'm hearing it could be $100,000 to $200,000 a year. That's not totally insignificant, but, you know, when you're talking a, you know, $40+ million budget, it's not huge. Most of it's coming in the audits, where currently each school with its own budget has its own audit, where if you have a global budget, it winds up being one audit. Some of the things as far as efficiency, some of the, you know, policies and procedures, if you have one board, then it can be streamlined a little quicker and easier. But it has been a challenge to identify areas where there's going to be increased educational opportunity. I think that they've done a really, really good job of that. So there's just people that are concerned about the loss of local control. And
Can I just ask, because I know in Berlin, not many people go to the elementary school board meeting. Do they go in Barrytown?
it's, you know, the few that I've been to, I can't say that I think that they're that well attended.
Yeah, I know, because every time we talk about local control, it's like, but they don't go to the meetings.
I know.
Right.
They'll go when something big's happening, you know, or something they don't like, but on a general basis, they don't go to the meetings.
Yeah, no one shows up.
No.
I remember when the first time the U32 budget went over $10 million, I thought, man, they were going to come from far and wide.
Nope.
And honest to God, if we had anybody show up that night, if I remember, it was like 3 or 4 people. But yet we had a time when we were going to talk about changing middle school basketball.
Uh-oh. Shame on
Everybody was going to get to play, but we were going to have like A-B teams.
Yeah.
We had 80 people show up.
Yep.
There you go.
Don't touch your sports.
Yeah, don't touch a mess with my kid.
I get it.
So,
That's probably the biggest issue of this whole thing is that they'd have to share sports teams, right? Or they already do share sports.
Well, you know, at Spalding they do.
Yeah.
And Spalding it's worked out very, very well. It's just, you know, I think it's a little bit concerned about local priorities.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and that's, you know, you have to listen to those because I mean, it's Vermont, everything's local, right? And
We'd like to think so.
we like to think so.
Yes.
Yeah.
but it is true. I mean, most schools are the center of the town. I mean, in Berlin, we don't have a town center.
Right.
And so any activities happens in our elementary school. Could you talk a little bit about that dollar transfer, which is the dollar transfer of school property, and who is that, a mandate or a suggestion? Somebody told me it was a recommendation.
Well, it was a recommendation initially, and then I believe we ended up having a townwide vote on that. And, you know, Barrytown, we have a fairly sizable recreation department with a rec budget.
Right.
And it has to do, I mean, we have tennis courts up there, and, you know, gee whiz, they
You
got a
fixed
skateboard
that, though,
park.
didn't you? You moved it over to the town.
We did, and along with, I think it was like 30 some odd acres. It was a pretty good sized piece. And so people felt very strongly that that needed to stay underneath town control
For sure.
and town ownership. And for the most part, I think it went as hoped that it would, and people are fine with that. The school can still access the parts of it that they need to, you know, the track and other stuff like that. I think the school's kept like maybe 7 acres.
But the school itself and the property will be sold to the supervisory union for $1. Is that not, or am I misunderstanding this?
You know, I'm not quite up to speed on that technical
Because
part
I
of it,
thought,
Pat, as far as
where our elementary school is, it's sort of in the prime center of Berlin. It's on the, that's not the Four Corners, but it's near the Four Corners. So if we have to give that up to the supervisory union for $1, and they can do with it anything they want, that's prime spot for us. And I was thinking that there may be some benefit in these unions, because that would free up land to be put back on the
tax rolls.
tax place, and just to let us do with it what we want.
It was my understanding, actually, quite honestly, that the supervisory unions themselves couldn't own anything. So I'm not sure just exactly how that is to look.
Huh. Do you know anything about that? I keep asking people,
Yeah,
and they won't respond
I'm trying
to
to
me.
think. I think the reason why supervisory unions might not be able to own anything is that they're not considered municipalities, whereas school boards are. That may have been something that changed under Act 46. I remember there being discussions about that.
Yeah, because that could be a lot of land going to a supervisory union when it should go back, in my mind, to the tax rolls.
Well, and
We,
I've
the
seen,
people, paid for it, I think.
Well, there's situations too where they've sold it to the town, the building to the town for $1 to get around these mergers, so that the school district itself doesn't have any assets.
That's what Rob said they did with the recreational fields.
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that a couple of school districts have done is they've voted to close their school.
Yeah.
Instead of being merged, because then they can reopen it as an independent school or something else that they can operate. Stowe came pretty close to doing that.
Yeah.
Which is probably the largest one, but North Bennington did, and there was another one. I want to say it was somewhere down near Manchester.
Oh,
They
really?
just did that too. Yeah, like Arlington, I think, did it.
Oh, Arlington,
Yeah.
God. So you had a committee working on this, a joint committee, I'm assuming. And they all had a lot of public meetings, a lot of public hearings, and
A
then,
lot of them.
Yeah, then they did a report. Was that report favorable or to the merger or not?
You know, they certainly recommended that we do it. It always wound up being about the interpretation of Act 46 as to whether it was going to be a mandate or not. There was some concern early on that we could potentially be merged with Twinfield or some other school districts. So it was always a matter of managing the outcome as best you could.
Yeah.
And I will say, I think they were called the 706 Committee. These folks worked very hard over a long period of time and really did a lot of work. And like I said, these articles of agreement, this last version has gone through and addressed a lot of the concerns that the more vocal critics had.
That's good, because we heard at the last show we did that if you don't have them, then you should accept the articles of agreement that's been written by the Department of Ed, or not Department of Ed, the Agency of Ed. And I think, and it sounds like they've been working on them, so maybe they wouldn't be people were rebelling against some of the things there, but maybe they've fixed it.
Right. And of course, it's a very different world now. Before November 6th, there was speculation that the board might not necessarily, force it, or excuse me, it was November 6th, or whenever they had their meeting in Barre.
Yeah,
November 6th was voting day. They've made that very clear, and now since then they have said you will merge.
Right.
So this is the lay of the land. These are the rules that we have to play within. And they have, as I understand it, indicated that if we did merge voluntarily on this fourth vote, that we could keep our our articles of agreement that are certainly much more palatable to people than
Right.
theirs are.
And is there going to be an increase in taxes or not? Do you know now? Because this whole exercise, I think, was started when the whole state was going lower those taxes. And so far I haven't heard anyone say that's going to lower taxes or improve performance. There's a concept.
Right.
You know, like the kids. What about the kids?
Well, at least initially, there's like $150,000 there that you can get initially to help structure and get set up, so you'll get that. And then it is my understanding that we're still eligible for the 8, 6, 4, and 2 cents off the tax rate.
Right.
Yep. So the tail off.
Exactly.
Yep.
If this goes down again, we're not eligible for that, so there will definitely be some increase there. As far as just from the system being an increase, it's hard to say, Pat. I rarely have ever seen school budgets really go down much.
No, they don't.
anyway.
Well, I think it's almost less increase is kind of the way it should be said.
They call it bending the cost
Yeah,
curve.
they're
Yeah,
bending the cost
right,
rate because they
right.
never really make it go down. They just make it go less than it would have been otherwise.
Exactly.
Right.
So we've saved you 2 cents of the 7 cents that
Yeah, right.
it's going up.
Right. Well, because they've calculated Berlin is 7 cents, going to go up 7 cents on the 100.
Yep.
It's a lot of money.
It's pretty steep.
Yep.
Pretty steep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think. So it's interesting because you brought up a point of just anecdotally talking to people about whether or not Act 46 is going to save education, and for the most part, all the districts that were kind of no-brainers, where there was definitely efficiencies to be had, all went in early, right?
Yeah, right.
This plan from the State Board of Ed is really not getting at the districts that were the low-hanging fruit, that there were efficiencies that could be had there. These are districts that have difficult operating structures. There's no one next to them that really operates like them, or they have other reasons for not wanting to merge. What they're doing is working. There's incompatible debt load. Transportation is a problem. Like, these are the districts that are in this last wave that the
Right.
State Board is trying to merge. There really is not much efficiency there in this final push, and this is kind of a debate even back when Act 46 passed in 2015. Are we really doing this for efficiencies? Because there's a few districts that saved. I mean, we look at Chittenden East, which was the first district in, technically didn't merge under the Act 46 requirements. They weren't in effect yet. I think they gave them the tax benefits anyway.
That was the Bolton.
See, that's the part
Bolton
that
Underhill one.
kills me. If you're voting no and then you won't get any of the benefits,
Yeah.
well, in order for it all to be successful, I'm sorry, I think, and if you're going to mandate it, then give you the incentives.
Well, this is
I
the
don't see-
third.
I mean, if they didn't really mean to listen to your vote in the first place, then they should give you the incentives to make it successvul.
Excellent point.
I think
Yeah.
you should
Excellent
bring
point.
that up.
Well, this is just
it
the
did
third.
get mentioned.
Yeah, this is the
Yeah.
third iteration of this too. Like, even back in 2006, they passed a bill that gave incentives for districts to merge, right?
Right.
And
Voluntarily.
Voluntarily, and there were some incentives attached to
Right.
it, some stuff for like study committees and stuff. And one district merged.
Right.
They increased those subsidies a little bit more, gave some more flexibility for how those mergers might look. They passed that in 2011. One more district merged. Coincidentally, it was Chittenden East that happened right at the end as they were talking about Act 46. And Act 46 passed, I think, a month before the merger vote. One more district merged under that model. All they did is take basically the same thing and made it mandatory and said you're
Right.
going to do
But
this.
under those circumstances, it was voluntary, so I
Right.
don't have a problem with that. They dangled the carrot and made people think about it. But this is mandatory. They voted, they said no, and then the state goes, too bad. Just kidding.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're really paying for your vote for yes. I mean, this is not the US of A.
Well, it's easier for the
It's
state
so
board if you
bizarre.
vote yes, so that's why they're.
Well, yeah, and it just makes you feel like, again, why did we go through all this
Right.
time and effort when you were just going to do it, just tell us up front.
Right, just right. Be honest
And
about it.
We had a meeting up at Barrytown Elementary here a couple years ago, and this was after there'd been a few voluntary mergers, and some of the criteria seemed to be starting to roll out. And I had said, listen, can't you tell us exactly what you're looking for?
Right.
Well, you know, that's not our role. It's like, well, wait a minute here. If it's
So-
going to eventually be your role, then maybe tell us now,
Right.
because it'll save us all a lot of time, effort, and frustration. But they did not want to do that.
It's not how it played out.
No,
Yeah.
it didn't.
What's interesting in all of this, because we talked earlier about how, you know, Barre Town and Barre City are really already meeting the goals. From the efficiencies perspective, out of a $4.5 million budget, you maybe save 100,000 or 150,000.
Well, I mean, it's when you combine all the Spalding Ambling, it's like 40+ million. I think
40
it's
plus.
like
Wow.
46
So
million.
46
maybe.
million, and you're maybe saving $150,000, $200,000.
Yeah, and even then, it's a little hard to totally quantify it because you go from having several small budgets and audits
Right.
to having one massive one. Well, I'm sure that the expense for that one massive one is going to be a large number as well.
Right.
So it's
Same thing with like business managers and your accountants.
sure.
and
I
all
mean,
that
we
stuff.
have one business manager, we have one superintendent. So again, the early and heavy lifting has been done.
Has happened already.
So under this new and improved merger, what's the balance of Barre City and Barre Town at the table voting on the board? Has that been discussed?
I think the makeup is going to be, if you have this new board, it'll be 9 people, and I think there'll be 4 from Barre Town,
5.
4 from Barre City, and then the 9th person would be like an at-large.
Oh, okay.
that
So that's
is-
not so bad. Some of the other breakdowns aren't so positive for the smaller towns.
Yeah.
They
Well,
may
that's-
as well just not bother showing
That's
up.
one of the bigger concerns, right? Is that you know
You get overridden by
you
the
get
big
overridden and you don't have any control.
Yeah.
And granted, you have a 3-year buffer built into Act 46 that can't close a school for 3 years, but you know that 3 years goes pretty quick, and then you're out to the wolves.
Right. Well, that's where our articles of understanding are very specific, that you can't have a school closure unless it goes to a town vote. That was one of the concerns, a few of the concerns from people, that this board would have too much authority
Right.
down the road and not necessarily totally reflect the community's wishes. So those are some of the things that people found that were critical, some comfort.
I want to go back to the savings thing and also the reaction that you got from the State Board of Ed, because I think it's kind of telling given some of the conversations that happened while Act 46 was winding its way through the legislature. A lot of Act 46 and the big reason why the Agency of Education pushed so hard to get it through is not necessarily for savings. In fact, the Agency of Education right up front said this is not about savings. We don't even know that there are going to be any savings. Former chair of the State Board of Education, who left right after Act 46 passed, said there are not going to be any savings overall. And so the Agency of Education was all about this is improving outcomes for kids. Now that's a really difficult thing to quantify.
It is.
And you can't do that in a 1 or 2 year thing. That's a 10, 15-year deal, trying to figure out if your educational benefits are actually realized, because you have to wait for these kids to actually go through a full cycle in the new district, and then you have to look at what their secondary education options are, their college achievement, job placement, all of that stuff, to really understand the effects of the educational benefits of a merger like this. So we're looking 15 years down the road before we really know that for sure. What this is really about in a lot of ways, and the reason that the agency pushed so hard to get it through, is it makes it easier for them to manage a system like this.
Sure.
With fewer administrative because the fewer administrative structures they have, the fewer business managers they're talking to, the fewer school boards they're talking to, the easier it is for the agency to manage this system that has really have numerous different operating models around the state, trying to standardize that. That's really what they're trying to do.
And yet, when you look at statute, the agency of education has very little authority to actually do anything. It's just about the money that they can control,
Right.
which is a pretty
Which
good
is all
incentive.
federal dollars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they don't. I was surprised when I went there as a deputy. I read the statutes and I'm like, what? There's no authority in that department, that agency.
Well, and further, and this is where they're going to get, they're going to get into legal issues with towns like Barre, particularly if Barre chooses not to merge in this fourth vote, is that Vermont is the first state in the country actually to have a constitutional requirement for education, the provision of education for its children. First state constitution in the country to guarantee the right of public education for children. Along with that, though, is the entity that the Constitution, the Vermont Constitution, tasks with that responsibility is the town. It specifically says towns shall provide for the educational needs of their children, of their kids. So it makes that very difficult for an unelected state board to step in and say, we're actually going to decide what's best.
Well, the legislature did it. Do they have the authority to give that over?
Well, there's a debate. There was a debate even at the time of whether the legislature had the authority to do that, and they decided that they politically didn't want to take that responsibility, even though there's a legal argument for it, and that's why they passed it off to the state board.
Well, I know that there are several legislators who supported this bill in 2015 and have continued to make it verbal that they support it, are getting a little pushback from the people in their towns.
Well, there's some that have
really
that voted for it, and it's a couple of sponsors of the bill even that have decided that they no longer support the bill.
Well, I think the one big issue, and you probably, not one size does not fit all, and that's the problem, because this is Vermont and we have cultural differences in each area, and we have differences the way we perhaps run our schools, so you can't just cookie cutter it.
You can't. We can certainly go through and take a look and say, okay, this is what we are looking for a basic education for a Vermont student, whether you live in Beecher Falls or Bennington. Reading, writing, arithmetic, a few other things like that.
3 R's, right?
There you go. But other than that, let's take the step back. But to be fair to the schools, we've got a lot of mandates that come out of Montpelier that aren't funded, and they have unfortunately become a fairly good size wing of the human service agencies. And so there's a lot that we're having to contend with, and in some cases it seems education becomes secondary to some of the other issues there. But I think we need to push back just a little bit and say, are we really getting the return on the investment that we envisioned when we decided to make this investment?
Do you remember when we were in school and we actually had guidance counselors who would sit and talk to us about our future?
Sure.
Now they have to act like social workers, and they don't do any counseling. They just keep things quiet and help the kids that are struggling during the day.
Right. Yeah.
It's bad.
Well, there's a decent argument for embedding actual social workers in the schools.
They've been talking about that.
Yeah.
Because it would be nice to have a guidance counselor. We've been talking about workforce development. If you know early on that there's such a thing as tech ed, maybe that's a place you should be, kind of informed about and decide whether that's where you want to go. But the counselors that we work, they really talk to you about what your skills are, and it was great. It helped me out.
And what life was after school, because this is kind of what we're preparing you for here is after school.
That's right, exactly. Now they're just putting out fires.
So we'll see. If I had thought that I was going to have much to do with the carpentry, I'd have paid a little more attention to algebra in school.
That's right.
You've talked a couple times about the amount of work that's gone into these discussions between Barre City and Barre Town, and the 706 committee and the multiple votes, the proposals that have gone before our voters. What was the process from the beginning, as towns across the state were going through this? What was Barre City, Barre Town? What is their approach to this massive piece of legislation that had passed to kind of get a handle on it and then figure out how to move forward?
Well, that was I think part of it initially, Ben, was to try to get a handle on it, because, as you said, it's pretty massive, and to understand how it really pertains to you, you needed to figure that out to figure a path forward. But I will say that the superintendent and some of the board chairs, they took that very seriously and started early on.
Good.
Trying to do the heavy work, and then they put together the 706 committees. And geez, they were meeting, oh God, I don't think I'd be exaggerating when I said probably once a month, especially initially. Mm-hmm. And they recognized that there were some things like the school and up for Barrytown and the rec complexes and things like that. Some things I had to take a look at. Some of the school's debt. I believe earlier on the city had a little higher debt. Barrytown Elementary had some fund balance money that they needed to discuss and figure out how to do that. So, there was an approach early on, more of how can we do this, but it was still always in the back, I think, of a lot of folks' minds, do we really need to do this? Right. Mm-hmm. Because we are arguably the poster child for how others could be and maybe should be.
Right.
So,
but you also mentioned before, and you were talking about how it was interpreted. Is it up for interpretation? I mean, does that cause trouble? Look at him smiling.
Apparently, the State Board of Education doesn't think so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, they have the state board, but is it up for interpretation the way it's written, or is it pretty clear?
Well, you know how that is. You've been there, Pat, and the three of us can look at language and right. Like I had said earlier, I had people reach out to me and ask me if I could get an interpretation from a legislative council as to whether the state board actually had the authority to mandate the merger.
Right.
And based on my conversation with them, not only did they have the authority, they've always had the authority.
Oh, they just didn't exercise it.
They didn't exercise it, and it didn't matter whether a community voted or didn't, if they voted affirmatively or not, they've always had this authority. And things like that would have been very nice to know,
right.
Have a very clear understanding of that, because I'm sure that would have had some influence over, what people did. And that's that.
I don't think anybody knew in 2015 that we were going to be here today.
No.
With the problems we've got.
Yeah, I remember early on with Act 46. The school choice. Was a major bone of contention for a lot of people.
Yep.
Because for some communities that.
Do you have choice in Barrytown?
No, not that I'm aware of. As far as there may be some agreements where if you have a child that I think there's like some reciprocity agreements, say, between Spalding and U32 where
the high school level
type of stuff.
Yeah.
We have there's universal high school choice anyway, but it is a reciprocity type deal where the sending school and the receiving school have to agree that this is the best option for the kid. It's usually in situations where there is, they feel like there's a personal safety issue for the student or something.
Well, that makes sense to let them go where they're safe or where they feel safe. I'm
exactly.
Sure they are safe.
Or there's opportunities like, for example, U32 to Spalding. Spalding has a tech center. Kid at U32 wants access to the tech center.
Right.
They do something to get the kid.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if they've said you have to merge and this other vote may not mean anything, what's the schedule for you?
Well, this is where it gets a little tricky. I believe that the next vote is going to be January 8th. And because it got voted down in Barrytown, it now has to pass, I think we have to have like 1,404 voters vote for it, because it's going to be a percentage of
the combined?
Or
just Barrytown?
I think it's just Barrytown, but that's an outstanding.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we had, like most, we had a high voter turnout. If it goes down, then it's my understanding that we could be subject to 5 more types of votes to get the structure in place to meet the state board's timeline and structure.
That's painful.
Very
I have
painful.
another word for it. What? I mean, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Well, it's kind of a little reminiscent. Is there a reason that they didn't want to wait until town meeting day to schedule the vote when people are already going to show up, for a vote anyway, or are used to showing up.
As far as this last vote, you mean? Ben,
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah.
Well, my understanding is the Board of Ed had actually, we had the vote on November 6th. The Education Board actually, their initial preference was for us to have it even a little earlier in case it didn't go. But they were willing to let us have it on the November 6th because if nothing else, you get a truer representation because you have a higher voter turnout.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was, I think.
And this costs you money every time you run one of these
Yeah,
things,
they're
a few bucks.
$5,000 to $7,000, I think.
Every
They're
time
not-
you have to do a separate vote, it costs a few bucks.
It sure does. Yeah, it
So
it
what are
absolutely
the
does.
teachers? Are the teachers saying anything about this? They figure they're going to have a job at the end of this? So,
Yeah.
but where? Who knows?
Well, and that's, I can't say that I've spoken to many myself, but I have spoken to people who have interacted with the teachers, and there are some that have those exact concerns, is that, what does this mean about,
Right,
where I'm employed and who do I work for?
right.
It is my understanding that because we have a district-wide supervisor union contract, that will continue to be the governing document.
Oh,
But it is reasonable to expect eventually that if you have some sort of a bubble in one school and not in the other, that you may end up having a bubble in fourth grade, then it passes, so now I've got an extra fourth grade
Right.
teacher
right.
in Berrytown Elementary that may end up having to potentially go to the city because that's where we get a job for you.
Yeah.
Those are all the things that have to be
I
worked
would
out.
have taken all that money and just invested in technology and, like in Washington County, hire a Latin teacher and have her through, the miracle of technology, teach the classes, in the smaller schools, and there you go.
Yeah, and those are some of the things that you wonder, could we,
Right.
should we, and are we?
Because there's so much possibility out there for technology to play a part in this. And we tried it a bunch of years ago, tried to push it, and I don't think anybody was ready for it because they pushed right back.
And
Did-
the state colleges
Yeah,
in
right.
particular.
Yep.
Yeah.
But so why do this? But anyway, I guess we're going to do it. We'll find out.
Yeah, I think that the board.
I just think we were too established to change. I come from Westchester County, has the exact same number of people that we have here in Vermont, and they have one, but they started out with one.
It grew.
One superintendency
Yeah.
over, and we're serving whatever, how many people we have here, 350, who knows. But anyway, it was started out that way. I went to a school made up of 5 towns in high school, but we started out that way. We didn't have five high schools and
Sure.
then merged them. So they just thought that was it. I figured that's what I do. You get on the bus, you ride an hour and a half, and we didn't have the roads we have here and the storms, and there's a lot to consider here.
Oh, this is not the first consolidation effort that we've gone through in Vermont
Right.
No,
either.
but this one's happening.
Well, this is the third one in 130 years. In the 1890s, we had 2,500 school districts in Vermont. Because we had neighborhood schools, and each school was its own
Right,
district.
for sure.
Yeah,
The one-room
so-
schoolhouses, right?
Exactly. So you think about 2,500 school boards and what that would have looked like. Like every other person in the state would have been serving on a school board, just about.
Wow.
And we went from that to about 300 school districts because we consolidated from individual schools to towns.
And probably they fought that.
And they fought that tooth and nail. That was a difficult
Oh, I
process.
can understand.
And then, over time, those neighborhood schools went away. We have elementary schools, and then, in the 1960s, the second big consolidation was
Union schools.
Union high schools, right? So you ended up with Spalding, you end up with Harwood, you end up with CVU, you end up with
Well, U32. I think,
U32,
69,
Yeah.
70.
all of those schools popped up, pretty successful.
And
overall.
U32 works very well, I think.
Yeah.
I've been to more of their boards than I have the board meetings than I have in Berlin.
The difficult part now is that, at first it was neighborhoods and then it was towns, and now we're losing, in this third round of consolidation, we're losing that tie to the local community.
Right.
And that's why this one was much more difficult than the one in
Well,
the 60s.
and I don't think it's over either.
And markedly probably more difficult than the one in the 1890s as well, because you're losing that local connection to an existing, unifying.
So how does it work
entity.
if the schools are not closing? Everything's going to operate the same except out of one supervisory union.
Right.
And if that works, would that just stay? That would answer everybody's questions. They just don't want their schools to close.
Right, and that was never, ever on the table for us. I mean, both of our elementary schools are 700, almost 800 students each.
Yeah.
I think
I hate to
Spalding
be
is.
stupid. Where are your two schools? I know where the one is,
You got Barrytown Elementary up.
by the town hall.
Yep, just
Yeah.
before that on the
And
on
where's
the right.
the other one?
The Barry City Elementary is down off of South Main Street. Do you know where like Tucker Machine is?
Yeah.
Well, you take the turn right by Tucker Machine, and it's the brand new school. Well, new school out back there.
Oh, I always thought there was just one. Where have I been?
Yeah.
I'm going to go check it out.
Yep. And then you've got obviously Spalding.
Yeah,
where
right,
Spalding
right,
is.
for
And,
sure. Are they both the same size, the schools? They're pretty, because that one was pretty large, the one by the town hall.
Yeah, no, but Barrytown, it's a good sized school. I honestly can't tell you the square
Yeah, no,
footage, but
yeah,
I know student-wise, they're very similar as far as numbers. I think the cost per pupil, they're within a couple $100 of each other per
Interesting.
pupil. So it's quite close.
Right, good.
And they're both pretty close to capacity too, so you couldn't necessarily close one school and move them all to the other one anyway.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
no. When they were talking, I mean, not to pick on anybody, but say like you got Orange, which is 5 or 6 miles from Barrytown.
Right.
It has its own school, and they consolidated with Washington and maybe some others. You could have, I think, a discussion about, okay, should a smaller school like that, would you want to roll that into,
Right.
like a Barrytown? Because there may be, I don't know what Orange is, maybe 80, 90 kids, I'm not sure. But
Does Graniteville, where do they fall in?
that's all Barrytown.
It's all Barrytown, yeah.
Yep, yeah, we have 5 little hamlets,
Okay.
communities.
So that's part of your district?
It is.
Oh, okay.
Yep, it sure is.
Well, I know Jeff Blow. We know Jeff Blow was very
Yes.
active, and he had an article that I read where he was outlining his concerns, and I think we've addressed most of them tonight. And I think at one part, the old articles, he said, will allow the unified board to move grades from one building to another, but now the new one says you can't without a vote. So it's not just closing, it's moving grades.
Correct.
So there's going to be a lot of voting. I hope these people are prepared to come and vote.
Well, yes, we are as well, and I have to give Jeff an enormous amount of credit,
Yeah.
because Jeff was one of those early on that was somewhat critical, but not inappropriately, that there was a lot of questions that needed to be answered here. And unlike some people who want to sit back and be critical and not roll your sleeves up and get the answers,
Right. Oh, no, Jeff,
he jumped right
dog
in.
with a bone. He
Oh,
was
yeah.
very good, Jeff.
Well, and he got on the board and worked very, very hard
Yeah.
to get answers to these questions and get some of this language in place that goes and addresses his and others'
Right.
concerns
Yeah,
about.
he had quite the list of what was in the old one and what they were able to
Yeah.
get in the new one. So
Right.
maybe it's not as bad as people originally thought.
So you'll see here shortly he's coming out very much in favor of this,
Oh, okay.
because at this point, the town, honestly, we have, short of joining the lawsuit, which I don't think there's an appetite for that, but I don't want to speak for everyone.
What would the lawsuit do from a timing perspective? Can a lawsuit stop, put a freeze on merging right now? Because when I asked you, they must have a deadline for when you're supposed to be merged. I'm assuming 6 months, a year.
I think we're looking for July 1st.
Whoa,
is the
wow,
number
that's
there.
a lot of movement.
That's
Yeah.
pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know the process as
Yeah.
far as the lawsuit. I'm not even sure where that is.
Yeah, it
yet.
hasn't been filed. There's two
Right.
of them out there that I know of. One hasn't, neither one has been filed yet.
Right.
Yeah, it would have to be filed, and then the argument would have to be solid enough for a judge to issue an injunction. that would stop
That
the
would
process.
stop it?
That would
Okay.
stop the process. And
Because
then
they
all
are,
the-
I'm assuming, I don't know the details, but I'm assuming there's some constitutional issues that they are bringing up.
Yeah, so that's part of it, and I think the injunction would have to be issued by a judge, and then that would allow those stop the process, and then allow the lawsuit to play out.
Okay,
and which would
all right.
be a couple of years.
Oh, well.
And I think the board just met for their final time.
Last week,
Last-
right? Last
last week.
Wednesday.
Last Wednesday, was it?
Yeah, I
And-
wanted to go so bad, and I wound up doing something else, and I was,
Because I know
Get
that's when
myself-
they came out in the Holstow, Morristown,
right.
Elmore.
Yeah, they were all there.
Oh, they're all fired up.
Yeah.
Sure. So I suspect that I would imagine there's a bunch going on behind the scenes right now as far as
Right.
timing wise and
Yeah.
getting the
Well, they
ducks
have to
lined up.
submit their report now, so we will see.
They do.
Now, I think some schools would like to merge because it works for them, so I would hate to see that stop if it's really something they think. And somebody told me, superintendent said, that this was one of the best exercises because we really stopped and thought about how we could do things better. And they haven't done that seriously, but that, they thought that this was going to end sadly or whatever. And they've made some remarkable improvements of just kind of being back against the wall. They just did it.
I
So
don't-
there is some good in this.
Oh, I think there is, and I don't think anybody would deny that we got kind of top heavy administratively. I remember when I was on the board at the time, because I was chair of Washington Central Supervisory Union, and at that time there was 63 supervisory unions throughout
You are a
Vermont.
glutton for punishment,
Well,
sir.
And at the time, there were many, many school districts out there that had the entire student population of Vermont underneath one superintendency.
Whoa.
Now, nobody was advocating going from 63 to 1, but it could sort of make the argument that we do seem to be a little top-heavy administratively.
We are.
Yeah,
We are.
absolutely.
Well,
over
because
time-
every year we send out some new, got to do this, new and improved way to teach our kids.
Yes.
And just as they're getting that implemented, they come out with another new way. And if they would just let one approach work for 5 years and decide whether it's working or not, I mean, they just drive schools crazy.
Yeah.
And the
Always changing the
superintendent's
rules.
got to make sure it happens.
And I think 63, I've looked at this too, the 63 supervisory unions, which is kind of comical because supervisory unions are really this loose administrative structure that sits between the school district and the state board or the agency of education. Kind of like mid-level managers, basically, are what they are, and mostly they exist originally for reporting purposes and for training teachers.
Kind of the business end of education.
Exactly, and there's really no reason to have 63 of them.
No.
No, and we're considerably less now, and I can't remember what it was, where we are now, because of course.
Because there
but-
was a talk
down to
about
low
bringing them all
50s
around
now.
the 14 different tech centers.
Tech center
and having the
districts.
tech center, which to me, I thought that was great.
Yeah.
The tech centers in the middle of these districts and have 14 of them, and that's
Yeah.
it. Because that at least to me makes sense. There's something that they have in common.
Right.
So.
Something currently
Yeah,
that they have in
right.
common together.
So we have just almost run out of time. Did I tell you? It went fast.
You did.
Thank you very much
Thank you
for
very much,
coming.
Ben. I
Thank you.
enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
Appreciate it
all
very
for
much.
tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.